Devin Booker opens, Chris Paul closes. It's been a pretty good recipe for the Phoenix Suns lately. 43 for Devin Booker, 21 for Chris Paul, and another win over the Utah Jazz by 8 on the road, covering, getting that 8th straight, and we'll talk about all of it right away on Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a contributor at Suns.com, as well as Dime Magazine, and a credentialed Suns media member for the past 5 seasons. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen each and every day. We are growing the YouTube channel. Thank you for finding us there and subscribing. We are, of course, available on every single podcast platform as well, and we are free. The best way to keep us that way is to listen and to subscribe. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell the Suns fan in your life to come spread the love and subscribe to the show if they have not already. 105-97, the Suns win their 8th straight game. Chris Paul and Devin Booker combined for 64 points, 16 rebounds, and 9 assists. That duo has kicked it into another gear lately, and if that's a taste of things to come, well, it will be a great rest of the season, and that's where we have to start. We'll get into some of the late game stuff. We'll get into the rotation. We'll get into all of the usual tricks, but what I think has to be addressed first and foremost is exactly what I said to start the show. The duo, and not even just the production or the box score numbers of the backcourt here, but the way that they are sustaining great play for 48 minutes. And in this one, you had Booker with 21 points in the first quarter, I believe 33 or 35 through 3 quarters. And then he actually did hit his own fair share of shots late, but it was Chris Paul running the offense to perfection late in this game. Talk about the semantics of that. To close the show, I have a nice way to address the defensive breakdowns on the part of the Jazz, but just generally speaking, the fact that the Suns can get that out of their 2 best players and have it not miss a beat is pretty incredible. Booker early on, I mean, he was just in his bag. I mean, in that zone from the mid-range where nobody's really able to do much about it. He's drawing fouls. He's getting to lefty floaters. He's pump faking and getting players off balance on the opposition and just creating openings for himself in a way that really nobody can. I mean, he is such a throwback and vintage type of player. We all know that by now, but these types of nights, I mean, he's had 2 of them in a row, basically. If you throw out that fourth quarter on Monday where he really couldn't hit the backboard at all, let alone make some shots, it felt like he's just been in a real zone. And then you have Chris Paul, who can roll the ball out in the fourth quarter and just engineer great possessions time after time after time. And it's a luxury that not a lot of teams have. That's exactly what Monty Williams called it on Monday post-game, which is, look, having a player like Chris to close games is just a luxury. In this game, the Suns were plus 18 in Booker's 40 minutes. They won this game by 8, which means that during the 8 minutes that Booker was not in the game, the Suns were a minus 10. So that should tell you quite a bit about the value that he had tonight and the way that he lifted the offense. There were, in the second quarter especially, 11 points in just that it alone in that second quarter, just 11. So Booker, of course, tends to sit for a lot of that. Without him, they did not have much until the fourth quarter when Paul was able to pick up his own level of aggressiveness. They were just on another level in this game. And it didn't really seem to matter what defense the Jazz threw at them. The Jazz, as I talked about on Monday, kind of poking fun at Hassan Whiteside a little bit, they like to be in that deep drop. But without the personnel to defend at the point of attack, it's just not much. It doesn't defer much. It doesn't, make a great player like Booker or Paul second guess what they're doing much at all. And yes, Mike Conley was back in this game. Royce O'Neal was back in this game, but those guys, I mean, I hate to break it to them, I guess, or Jazz fans, but the level of perimeter defense is still a major issue for this team, and it continues to be why this matchup just does not scare me if I'm the Suns. These guys, Booker and Paul, are able to sustain this type of offensive punch, and the Jazz can do nothing about it. I mean, that's just the reality. Even if they had switched or blitzed or any of those things, I think they would have had an incredibly hard time executing it. That's part of why they have to stay with their usual scheme, because they don't have the personnel to switch. They don't have the personnel to blitz with their big man. It's just that drop, and you're giving the best pull-up shooting tandem in the NBA potentially space to do exactly what they want to do. And they did so tonight. Again, 64, 16, and 9 combined for those two. They're both playing nearly 40 minutes and winning games. And that's the bottom line. 38 and 9 this team is now, and not showing any signs of letting up. Minnesota on Friday, but there's more to get to in this game. We'll talk about the defense on how the Jazz tried to stop things late. We'll talk about Jordan Clarkson, hack-a-Biyombo. There's a lot to get to. First, though, BetOnline wishing you a happy new betting year as they continue through the NFL playoffs and into the NBA stretch run. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action in the new year. They also, to celebrate 2022, have a new updated desktop and mobile website. So go to betonline.ag on the web or download that app. Sign up today and use the promo code LOCKEDON when you make your first deposit to get a 50% welcome bonus. That's promo code Locked On when you make your first deposit to get a 50% welcome bonus straight to your account. From football and basketball to hockey, boxing, UFC, even your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers in the new year at BetOnline. BetOnline remains the fastest and easiest way to make a bet on any sport. BetOnline, where the game starts. So no DeAndre Ayton as he nurses that right ankle sprain. And as I mentioned yesterday, heading into this one, JaVale McGee listed as out as well with left knee soreness. So we'll see if that lingers for him. But as I predicted, as any reasonable person would have predicted, what we ended up seeing as a result was a heavy dose of Bismack Biyombo in that starting lineup. And then Jalen Smith off the bench at the 5 spot, who I will actually say, we'll get into the Biyombo thing because I think that's pretty interesting here long term. But Jalen Smith played pretty well. He had Eric Paschall got one on him early, and then he had 2 blocks in the first quarter on layups where he was able to really recover at the rim. I think some of that is just teams feeling like they can test him and him surprising guys, but also, I mean, there's something to be said for the awareness and the athleticism that takes. That's no easy thing to do, especially for a guy who's still feeling his way around the NBA. He also was able to get the offensive glass like he often does and was better than 50% from the field. So a strong game from him, but the real decisive moments came when Biyombo was on the floor late in this game. He checked in about 4 or so minutes left, if I'm remembering things correctly. A little too late, in my opinion, but maybe Monty Williams knew something that I did not and predicted correctly, that the Jazz with Biyombo out there, historically, one of the worst free throw shooters in the league, they opted to hack him. And the results were mixed, to say the least. So Monty was probably right to expect that might happen, but at the same time, the Jazz could not execute it. So the first possession down the floor, Jordan Clarkson shoves Biyombo while Chris Paul still has the ball at the top of the arc. Biyombo down around the dunker spot at that sort of extended post area, and Jordan Clarkson fouls him. Well, that is not allowed. Clarkson learned that the hard way. It didn't seem like either he knew that rule or just had the mind fart for a second and did the foul. And so what ends up happening in that moment is 2 free throws and the ball back. So the Suns were able to take full advantage there, extend their lead, and make Clarkson and the Jazz pay for it. The next time down the floor, though, they had an actual pick and roll where Booker, I believe it was, they set like a stack screen with Bridges and Biyombo. Bridges flared out, and Booker tried to go downhill around the Biyombo screen. Bojan Bogdanovic fouls Biyombo, and I believe he made one of two or both. He definitely did not go 0 for 2 there. It didn't really matter at that point unless he had missed both, and then even with that, you're still looking at an uphill climb for the Jazz. So that Clarkson mistake really screwed them. And of course, just the offensive execution that the Suns were able to put forth iced the game. It was done by then. But long term, I do think this is interesting because it's going to crop up in the playoffs for sure. When teams have a long runway to plan for this matchup, they're going to isolate the fact that Biyombo is a liability at the line, and they're going to make him take free throws. So, what I think that reality begs the question is, will Monty trust Biyombo to actually play minutes in the postseason? And yes, we know Frank Kaminsky, whatever happens there, he is likely to have a shot to be back in time to play in the playoffs. Dario Saric, probably a little bit less likely, but not completely impossible. Jalen Smith, whether he's on the roster, or frankly, whether Saric is on the roster, I think that what I'm saying is there are a lot of plans that would be A, B, C, D, maybe before Biyombo even would step foot onto the court, because he's gotten a lot of time lately, but that's a little bit misleading. DeAndre Ayton had COVID. Then he has had this ankle injury. JaVale McGee has missed some time. So that has created this opening. But I think for this reason and the fact that there's other better options on the roster, I think that Biyombo will be the third or fourth center on this roster when the playoffs come around. People have said, oh, well, the Giannis thing, like, well, Ayton had to worry about his fouls. Like, if you were in a situation in an NBA Finals matchup where Bismack Biyombo is guarding and checking Giannis Antetokounmpo in a big moment, I think you've already lost the game or lost that battle at the very least. So Biyombo is great at what he does. I've highlighted the short roll passing that we've all noticed, and his energy on the glass, especially as an offensive rebounder, is incredibly helpful for this team. He's gotten the athleticism stuff that I frankly didn't necessarily realize that he still would be capable of in terms of blocking shots, finishing at the rim. His free throw shooting has not been a complete nightmare like you might have worried, and he's just been a really strong piece of this team. I think he's fit in seamlessly. But that said, I do just think this hack-a-Biyombo was sort of a reminder that he is a limited player. He is somebody who is great as an insurance policy, but is not somebody who in the past, really since he was in Toronto, has been part of great playoff teams. And, there is a reason why he has those limitations and they're firmly there. So he is somebody who has frankly probably contributed multiple wins to this Suns team already. He has incredible qualities as a role player that make him an innings eating type of big man in the regular season. But I don't think that this marriage is going to last into the postseason. And if it does, I think that the Suns will get a lot of these types of things thrown at them, and they might regret it. So not to dump rain on any of this and rain on the parade at all, but I do just think there has to be a level set with this type of situation where he has been so great, and there are just some things that might hold him back going forward. I want to talk about some of the other defensive stuff from the Jazz. I also want to talk about Jordan Clarkson, who for the second straight game poured in points and almost made this a little bit of a scare for the Suns. So we'll get to all of that in just a sec. First, though, one more quick break. So I talked in that last segment about the hack-a-Biyombo strategy by the Utah Jazz, how it worked, how it didn't work, why it was kind of too late, and what it tells us about the future of the big man rotation for the Suns once DeAndre Ayton and JaVale McGee return. But one of the other parts of this whole thing for the Suns and, how they match up against this team, what we might see going forward in terms of how opponents guard Chris Paul and Devin Booker was how the Suns were able to get Mike Conley off of Chris Paul, because that was a key. We knew the return of Conley was going to change this game. He's been nowhere near the all-star caliber guy he was the first half of last season, but obviously he is a big improvement over the younger Trent Forrest and some of the other guys who were getting playing time, Jared Butler, on Monday night. So when clutch time arrived, the Suns made a concerted effort to get Conley off of Chris Paul. And the way that they did that, which Mark Jackson was right on top of on the broadcast, so if you were watching the game, you heard this highlighted, is that they set an initial screen for by Cameron Johnson. He set an initial screen way up high. That basically set the stage for Bogdanovic to then be the one guarding Chris Paul. And then the Suns transitioned into the actual pick and roll where Biyombo set a high screen, and it was Bogdanovic who basically had to try to get over it and navigate that screen. What predictably happened is that Paul got several open mid-range jumpers or even a layup at one point. And then even after the Jazz tried to adjust by doing a quick, basically re-switch, they were able to get an open three for Cam Johnson out of that. And at the end of the day, it didn't much matter. And I think some of that is the reality. Again, the Jazz do not have the personnel to keep up with the Suns, but it is also something where it's a continuation of what we've seen all season long. We've seen transition drag screens where Chris Paul is able to just fly down the court and somebody will pick his man off. We've seen some of this early screening stuff, almost like LeBron will do, where he will call over the player who he wants to screen for him to get a bad or at least worse defender on him, a mismatch on him. And then from there, maybe he'll isolate or maybe he will call for a more traditional pick and roll with the big man. And those things are all done. I mean, frankly, to be blunt, straightforward with you guys about it, I mean, those are being done because of the scare that Patrick Beverley, but especially Drew Holiday, put into the hearts and minds of the Suns. I mean, I think there's no really way other than that to say it. We saw the way that Beverley, but again, I will stick to, for the most part, Holiday, were able to just hound Paul. And it not only resulted in a worse performance by him, but also injury and physical deterioration. So these things are all new little wrinkles where, look, is Drew Holiday going to be surprised to see one more screen if they meet again in the NBA Finals? Is Gary Payton Jr., for instance, on the Warriors going to be thrown off by the idea that one more screen is headed his way or that there's a transition guy standing in his way in transition? No, of course not. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's just little things. And that's all it will take because, again, as excruciating as it may have been at times to watch Drew Holiday do that or Patrick Beverley do that to the Suns and have the point guard be limited yet again in the playoffs, it didn't. At the end of the day, the Suns won 2 games before it ever started to be a factor. They had a chance in the fourth quarter of game 6. They had a chance in the fourth quarter of game 5. Like little things, a little bit more health, a little bit more effectiveness from your best players can be the difference. And so I think that coupled with the fact that Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, those guys can do a little bit more in those spots now. All of that, I think, is going to create a better situation and a little bit more for the defense to be aware of so that maybe Chris Paul, just dribbling the ball is not such a nightmare like it has been. So just a little bit of a thing to add to what Mark Jackson was highlighting there late in that game because it will matter. But that also that also brings us to another. This might be a first in the history of this podcast. I'm adding. Well, first of all, I only just recently, just on Monday, brought back the Facundo Campazzo All-Star team. And I will have to say, because I think if I'm going to bring it back, there's going to be too many guys to add. So we'll retire last year's additions. So that means Willie Cauley-Stein and Facundo Campazzo. I think that's it. I think those are the only two that I can for sure remember. I'm sure there might have been others, but those are the two that I know for a fact were in there. Those guys are retired. They are Hall of Famers in that team now. So that gives us two more spots here because I'm already adding another Jazz player to this team. And I think you know where I'm going here. Bojan Bogdanovic, you have been bestowed with the honor of being part of the Facundo Campazzo All-Stars. You could not defend Chris Paul in space for the life of you, and the team lost. You also shot 3 of 13 from the field. I get it was your first game back, but, these are the breaks. You might have to play the Suns in the playoffs, and if so, let's just hope that your team doesn't have to count on you defending Chris Paul in space, because it did not go well. It will not go well going forward, and it was as predictable as anything that happened in this game. So, Whiteside Monday, Bogdanovic on Tuesday, or on Wednesday. We'll monitor, and I won't be so gratuitous with giving spots out from that team so easily. But look, this got ugly this week. You gave Chris Paul, a guy who was perfectly content to take 8 shots in a game at times this year. He went off for 20 plus in 2 of 2 games against a conference. I mean, frankly, like a conference contending rival at this point. Like, you got to be better. Okay. That's that. Let's close out here with something that I'm going to unveil. Another new closing recap segment here, which is Monty's Mind. I think that's workshop. I'm not positive on it, but I think that's what I'll call it, Monty's Mind. And look, this is a pretty. I will be very reserved with how often I go to this segment, but that's mostly because I am the last person to be criticizing or getting inside the mind of an NBA head coach. But sometimes things are glaring, and while I may not know the exact perfect explanation for what could have or should have been different, I can at least acknowledge what happened in reality, which is in this case that they needed to do something different against Jordan Clarkson. Far too often you had Chris Paul, and this was true on Monday at times as well, to be honest. You cannot have Chris Paul defending somebody who is quicker than him, is twitchier than him, and who is as hot as Clarkson got. I mean, honestly, rule number 1 here is just change something when a player is scoring like that. I understand you don't want to overreact, but when Clarkson makes 3 threes in the first, few minutes of the fourth quarter when he checks in, you've got to do something about that. You just have to change something. Second of all, you don't want the guy that you're leaving out there on an island to be your, late 30s offensive fulcrum. You don't want that either. You have Mikal Bridges out there. They did eventually make that switch and make a concerted effort to make sure Bridges was guarding Clarkson, and he went away quietly after that. But you even saw Clarkson burning Cam Johnson. Honestly, I would say, Booker is an option in those types of moments, as we saw to close out the game on Monday. Bridges is obviously always going to be the guy. I know that in this type of matchup, though, you want Bridges out there against Conley, or you want him out there against Bogdanovic potentially in certain moments. So Clarkson, it takes a couple possessions to react, and I get that. But in this game, with how solid his defense was, I don't think it's necessarily crazy to put a guy like Elfrid Payton out there for a possession or two, just to react, just to fight fire with fire. And look, it didn't end up mattering. It didn't end up swinging the game in a dramatic way. It made things a little closer than the Suns might have liked, just like we saw on Monday, but it didn't result in a loss. So you can't complain too much. Maybe it's not worth, again, that overreaction of putting Payton in or really changing and scrambling your defensive strategy from the jump. But I do think you have to try something. And Payton, if he's not out there for that, then what is he out there for? We saw Monty do it at times with Javon Carter, with Torrey Craig, with other players. So I think at the very least, while Cameron Payne recovers from this wrist injury for the next week or two, you got to be willing to try stuff like that. Payton is a really strong isolation defender. Like he really is. He can guard a pick and roll. He can guard a straight up ISO, and he will do a really good job at that. So, guy like Clarkson, you got to try stuff. You got to make sure that he doesn't make it a little bit too close for comfort, or heaven forbid, turn it into an actual win for the Jazz. So, Monty's mind, we'll come back to that one when I feel comfortable doing it. Do not expect it to be an every night occurrence. I'm not that type of analyst by any means. I'm not going to sit here and criticize the coach every night, but that one did stick out to me. And it does matter long-term too, because Clarkson's not the last guy the Suns will see like that. That'll close us out, guys. Closing out the full week tomorrow with Aaron Edwards of All Caps NBA for our weekly check-in with Aaron. We'll see what comes up between the two of us. Might talk a little Jazz, might talk a little James Jones. We'll see. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen, though. Tonight, after the buzzer, Thursday morning, whenever you are getting to it now, go make Locked On Bets your second listen today and get ready for NFL Wildcard Weekend. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.